Hello and welcome to First Contact, the world's first podcast where we openly discuss all things relating to humanity's preparation for open contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. I'm your host, Isha Patel. If you are loving this content, please be sure to join us in the First Contact Facebook community and let us know what you think. Let's dive into another exciting episode of First Contact. Hey everyone, and welcome to today's episode on First Contact. Today I've got Julien Lacave joining us today. Julien is very interested in UFOs, has done a lot of research on the topic, but also has an interest and expertise in geopolitics. So we'll be looking at the topic of UFOs from a few different avenues, going into a little bit the historical side of things and looking at some different cases as well. So Julien, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm really excited to get started on this conversation, which I know you know a lot about already. So let's begin just by giving us a little bit of an introduction about yourself, and then we'll dive into some exciting topics for today.
Well, thanks for inviting me here today. Look, I would say in terms of education, I've studied, I've got a master in geopolitics, so I'm very interested in modern history and international affairs as well, and how, conflicts and powers, evolve in this new century, since, the collapse of USSR also, but, the rise of other powers like China. So I'm very much interested in also climate change. It's been my background for my research area for about 25 years. And so how humans have largely contributed to, global warming with more frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, and how climate change is forcing us to redefine our economic system, financial system, etc. So that's also an area of research I've been very much interested in. And then about 10 years ago, I started to really research on cosmology, which I'm sure you would be interested in. Cosmology and also quantum physics, for example, and string theory. So really try to read some literature about our understanding of the universe, if you like, from a scientific perspective. So reading Lawrence Krauss, reading Brian Greene, Stephen Hawking, etc. And during that research, that personal time of research in cosmology and science, I came across what we call the Fermi paradox. And the Fermi paradox was developed, I think, in the 60s by an Italian physicist. And he was saying in his paradox that there was billions of stars, potentially in our own galaxy, and also billions of galaxies in the observable universe. And so there should be life everywhere. We should see signs of life, and we see nothing. So that's the paradox. And I thought that's a bit, I think that's a bit minimalist to look at this way. I think there is potentially signs of life, and that's when I started to research the UFO topic, to really try to understand what was behind the flying saucer culture, and what was really going on behind the scenes in terms of UFO research. So that's about 7 years ago now.
Amazing. And I do want to dive quite deep into everything that you know on that topic. I guess the first $1 million question is, do you actually believe that there are intelligent beings who are visiting planet Earth right now?
Well, again, it's a bit related to the question of climate change. When people ask, do you believe climate change is, and I think the term believe is not the right term. I think that can be used for theological research, or talking about religion. Then I think the term believe is more appropriate. I think there's a paper trail of evidence, really clearly, that has been leaked or declassified over the last 7 or 8 decades, that clearly leads towards a few realities, if you like. One of them is that we have been detecting physical crafts entering and leaving our atmosphere at least since World War II. So that's a reality.
Okay, that's a very strong conviction in that. I mean, you're saying this with a level of certainty. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here just for a little moment. What is, in your opinion, one of the biggest key pieces of evidence that has led you to conclude that this is actually a reality for us?
Okay, well, often there's a report that's often forgotten because it was released in 1999, so that's 24 years ago now, and that report was it was commissioned. It was a team effort, if you like, by the French Space Agency, Agence Française Spatiale, by a group of universities in France, by the French Gendarmerie, which is the French police force, if you like. So Gendarmerie is it's a part of the French army. Mm-hmm. It's a police force that's detached from the French army, if you like, French army forces. And also with the CERN, the Center for Research on Extraterrestrial Life, and other research centers as well towards space research and life in space. And that report was about a lot of pages, actually quite thick, but about 300 cases were studied in that report. From half of them were about half of them were from military cases, gendarmerie and military cases, and half of them were from civilian witnesses with a lot of evidences on the ground or visual evidences or injuries, etc. And and spanning from the 1950s to the end of the 1990s. And I invite everyone to read that report. It's in French, but you can find it in English as well. And it's there for the public to read. And it was presented to the French President Jacques Chirac at the time, and the Prime Minister Lionel Jospin, who decided to disclose the full report to the media. And so the French media made a lot of articles at the time on UFOs. So that's really, for me, one of the best evidence, because it comes from serious sources, research groups, French Space Agency, French Police Force, and a lot of witnesses. And it clearly states at the end that clearly there's clear evidence from observations that there's about 10% of cases on these 300 that clearly are not explainable in conventional ways and are probably from extraterrestrial origin. And that's the conclusion. And it also says that the American government, or the American system, democratic system, has been involved in misleading its population, or even not disclosing the truth on the UFO phenomenon, and it's not a good thing for democracy. So that's a great report, COMETA report, COMETA. But then there's a lot of research that's been conducted by researchers like Richard Dolan, Richard Hastings, Robert Hastings, etc. A lot of books have been published with leaked information from various government agencies or declassified through the Freedom of Information Act. So there's a lot of documents there that shows that we've been trying to monitor these objects for many, many decades now, and more, and there's more as well to that. But that's just a stark reality that I think needs to be discussed in the public space. The fact that yes, we're not alone.
So in all the years of research that you've done, have you personally spoken with any of these military personnel? And I'm coming from the frame of, there's a lot of people out there. I mean, there's people on the scientific end of the spectrum, the likes of Avi Loeb. Then there's people on the journalism end of the spectrum, like Frank Jacob and Ross Coulthard here in Australia. Then you've got people like Bob Lazar who are coming out and saying, well, actually, I worked on the actual craft myself. Have you personally spoken to any of these people or seen any of these artifacts for yourself?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I had dinner with Ross Coulthard, since you talk about Ross, the last month in Sydney. So we had a lot of discussions around the people that he met during his stay in the United States, during his visits in the US. I have regular catch up with the director of MUFON Australia and New Zealand, Roger Stankovic, good friend of mine, where we talk about cases that are reported through the MUFON network, some outstanding cases that occurred or were reported last year, for example. One of them was in New Zealand. So yeah, talking to a lot of these people regularly. I had an interview, which is on my website, ufoparadigm.com, with a former USAF, US Air Force pilot, who had a quite amazing UFO encounter in the early 80s in England, when he was based there, stationed in the American US base in the UK. Yeah, so always talking to interesting people. I haven't spoken to Bob Lazar, though, personally, but I know quite a lot about, quite a bit about his life, if you like, especially through the documentary from Jeremy Corbell on Bob Lazar.
So
there's
from your personal experience and the conversations that you've had, what can you tell us? What have you learned? I mean, I'm sure, you know, even especially people like Ross, I mean, they've probably got a wealth of wisdom sitting in there, probably more so than what's come out in the books and the documentaries. So could you give us an overview of maybe some of the key things that you've learned from your research that give evidence to the fact that we are being visited here on planet Earth?
If you want more evidences, you want to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, give us some specific examples. So for people who are watching this, they might not have gone and done as much research as you guys. So for the person who's watching this, what are some of the stories that you can tell us from your research, either personally or from others?
Sure. Okay. Look, there's hundreds of events, if you like, that occurred in the past 80 years. Specifically, I've been very much interested in military cases, because the military is very serious about research on UFOs, and that's been the case for the appearances of the Foo Fighters during World War II. So, and they have technology as well. They've got tools, they've got equipment that allow them to really measure and understand the shape of these objects, the speed of these objects, how they maneuver through space, how they transmedium, so they can go through space, Earth atmosphere, and water without any problems. So the military all around the world, not just the US military, by the way, but here in Australia, in France, in Europe, and in other countries in the world, have had the chance to analyze, to look at the movements of these objects in our atmosphere specifically. There's been, for example, the 2004 Nimitz case, where there was a group of Navy ship, US Navy ship off the coast of San Diego, who actually were able to record flying saucers, lights, orbs, objects that were tracked on radar equipment, and that, you know, came back to several times to that group of destroyers and other naval ships. And that was something that was reported by the Navy, and that's the famous Tic Tac UFO case. I'm not sure if you heard about that case, where there was an object that was tracked visually as well, and on equipment on board of F-18 Hornets. And pilots came out after a few years and spoke about this incident where they tracked that object, plunging from 50,000 feet to the surface of the ocean in less than a second, which is just amazing. And then stationary there, and then flying around the F-18 as it was trying to do some defensive maneuvers. So that's a very interesting case of the Tic Tac UFO, which, by the way, we've seen Tic Tacs before. There's been Tic Tacs reported in the 1930s, I think in Alaska, by some pilots. And so there's a lot of cases like that have been leaked or declassified by military organizations around the world. The Chilean government did that as well. So there's a whole range of examples. There's been contacts, there's been death, there's been pilots that we lost during dogfights with these UFOs, well-reported dogfights, and losing pilots and losing planes as well. So there's a multitude of examples.
So if there is so much evidence, which it seems that there is, I mean, the further I go into my research as well, I'm realizing more and more that there's ample evidence, more than enough to say that, okay, this is a real phenomenon. Why do you think we're not just being told about it? Why do you think there's such a big need for secrecy around their existence?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's a question that we often ask ourselves, and it's a question that Richard Dolan has been trying to answer really well in his book, Disclosure, UFO Disclosure. That's about 10 years old now, a bit more, 10, 12 years old, 10, 12 years ago, where he lays out some scenarios as to why so much secrecy. And it's a very broad question. It's a very big question. So I'll try to answer in a short way. But first of all, I think the concept for humans right now to realize and accept and try to understand that we are not alone, and that there's a multitude of civilizations out there. And we can talk about this a bit more in detail later. And there's a multitude of potential beings from other dimensions at the same time, etc., etc. There's a whole range of phenomena that are occurring right now that leads us to the fact that we're not alone, and we don't really understand what is going on. And potentially it's a threat to humanity. So that question, if you like, is extremely challenging for any form of authority to disclose to the public. And that's just one fact, one way to answer the questions. It's a bit like Galileo when he said, it took 300 years for the church to accept the idea of Galileo that the Earth was not the center of the universe whatsoever. It was just a planet revolving around the sun, and that the sun was just one star amongst millions of others. And it took 300-400 years, and that person was jailed for life. And I think that it will take 200 or 300 years, and it's been already 80 years, so probably another 150 years or more for humanity to just accept that what I've just said. Another problem is that secrecy has been privatized now. So since the creation of the CIA in 1958 to handle the UFO problem, the problem of secrecy has been so big that it's been compartmented between large private defense contractors, if you like. So no one really has access to everything. So to have access to everything, it would require you to have a very high level sort of access to these above classified documents. So again, another difficulty. And I think as well that it would potentially disturb or destroy our society as we know if we were to tell absolutely everything about what we know about abductions and crash retrievals and demonic entities and whatnot. I think it would potentially crash the stock markets, challenge religions. It would potentially, even the rule of law could potentially be challenged as well by society, who would demand for the truth and would ask for justice as to why, how, and how much it costs to keep these information secret for so many years, and what's the infrastructure behind, and what's the black budgets and everything. I mean, it's a can of worms that. So I think there's like some researchers, like Richard Dolan says, there's a red line for now anyway, in 2023, there's a red line of disclosure that I think is here to stay for a while. Because it's such a big issue.
Well, they would certainly have to release a lot, because if you, I think it's one of those topics as well where if one thread comes out, you're at risk of unraveling the whole tapestry, right? And it just keeps going and going and going and going. In saying that though, a lot of the information is already out there. I mean, for the person who wants to go looking for it, it's not exactly hard to find. You can just talk to the people. There's enough books out there. Enough people are having experiences. I mean, you can certainly find whatever you need to find if you have the tenacity to go and find it. One of the things you mentioned that I found quite interesting in what you just said, you just lumped together multidimensional beings, demonic entities, and UFOs all into sort of like an umbrella sort of branch. Let's go into the multidimensional side of things. What do you know about that? And also, I would love to hear your perspective on how that connects to what you know about quantum physics and string theory as well.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm nowhere near to pretend to be a physicist or a scientific person. That's not my background. But from what I've read, from the research of eminent professors like Brian Greene, in string theory, for example, so Brian Greene is really the one who's developed that theory of the string theory, where mathematically we can prove that potentially during the Big Bang, or what we understand of the Big Bang, there's only 3 dimensions that actually inflated during that time of inflation. So there's 3 dimensions that we know of that rolled out, if you like curled out faster than the speed of light to create what we call the observable universe. But there's mathematically potentially another 8 dimensions. So that's a total of 11.
I've heard that they have found 13 now.
Yeah. But the concept is that there's other dimensions that have not, if you like, developed, curled out. They're still curled in like pieces of strings, and they are not visible to the human eye. So that's, if you like to make it simple, what the string theory is all about. And that's related to quantum physics because it's all about what's happening at the very, very small level. When we look at the atomic level or inside an atom at the quartz level and even deeper further. So that's the relation with quantum physics. So for example, with quantum entanglement, we've proved that 2 particles can be entangled together, and one could be on Earth and another particle could be billions of light years away. And if you change the spin of that particle and the speed of the rotation, so the spin angle and the speed, that's how quantum computing works, right? You store emission by manipulating atoms, their spin and the speed of the rotation. And when you change one, another particle that's entangled to that one will change as well automatically. That's another concept as well of particle physics or quantum physics. So there's a lot that we don't understand about dimensions. And it seems to me that that sometimes dimension could potentially interact with our own sort of world, physical reality. Anyway, mathematically, we've sort of proven that there's potentially other dimensions. So that's sort of the link to be quick with UFO research and quantum physics.
So do you think the key to understanding UFOs is also connected to our understanding of other dimensions? I mean, there's a lot of people out there that say, you know, that these beings exist in other dimensions, and so they can be perceived through not the physical senses, but you know, this is where we get into more of the esoteric side of the spectrum, where people say, okay, if you want to connect with these beings, you have to utilize your non-physical senses to access high dimensions. Where do you sort of stand with that?
Well, that's excuse me, another question I get asked all the time. People ask me more broadly, what are UFOs? What do you think this is all about? Who are they? Or I like when people ask, who are they? What do they want? What's their agenda? It's a bit like asking, okay, life on Earth. What is it? Describe me life on Earth and what's the agenda of life on Earth? There's a multitude of forms of life on Earth and multitude of agendas as well. So I think that's what's happening with what I call the UFO phenomenon is that there's a multitude of explanations to the phenomenon. And one of them includes potentially interdimensional beings. And of course, we all heard of CE5, and I've heard myself of people who meditate and try to enter in contact with some of these beings that could potentially be interdimensional. But I think it's not the only part of the puzzle. And we've also had examples of encounters with physical beings. There's been also, a lot of research around extraterrestrial beings. There's been leaks around crash retrievals with bodies inside the craft. So we're talking physical bodies here. So the UFO phenomenon is very broad. And I think we need to consider that I believe, and that's a belief this time, that through my research, we are dealing with a multitude of forms of life. Some of them are potentially from planet Earth. Some of them are from other planets in our solar system, probably, and other solar systems in our neighborhood. Some of them are across further away from our galaxy. Some of them are intergalactic, potentially from other galaxies. Some of these civilization type 3 could be extremely advanced and have developed the art of living in space, so without any planets, just in massive structures. Some of these civilizations are potentially interdimensional, so from other dimensions. Some of these phenomenon can be potentially, like I said before, potentially demonic and related to negative forces that we don't fully understand. Like we don't even understand dark matter. We don't even understand how, there's a force there. When we look at a galaxy, there's a force.
97% of our universe.
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered around dark matter. And the fact that we call it dark is interesting because in our culture, dark is often negative and scary. And so there's a whole range of, I suspect, there could be time travelers as well. So there's a whole range of phenomenon, but that's not, but again, what's interesting to note is it would be good, I think at this stage, after 80 years, to have broader discussions in the public about that reality. And also the fact that we can see, I think the number is around 400 per year, physical craft, triangular craft, or like saucer-shaped crafts, typical flying saucers craft, or cigar-shaped objects that we see every day in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. in our suburbs around the world, or entering the atmosphere. And what are these things doing? So I haven't seen any triangular object or any cigar-shaped object or any UFO. I've seen videos of these objects. There's a lot of material that's still classified, but there's a little bit that's been leaked. But I've seen a white orb one day, which was quite interesting, and a lot of witnesses around the world, I'm sure you would know, often make reference to not a flying saucer, but a white orb, a white light.
You've seen one of those?
I've seen one of these lights.
Can you tell me about that? Where were you?
It was in Australia, in Bondi Beach, and it was about 10 p.m. on a Friday, about 10 years ago. And I was on my balcony sitting outside, so it was pitch black. You could see a few stars, but there was a bit of light pollution as well. And suddenly, in my angle of side of view, I saw what I thought at the time was a shooting star. But quickly I realized it was probably not a shooting star. So that light was a small orb, came very quickly and in a 90-degree angle, very quickly, about half a kilometers away from where I was, and went down very quickly to North Sydney and just stopped and disappeared. And again, for a few weeks and months, I thought that was just a shooting star. But when I started to research the UFO phenomenon, I came back into that moment. And I realized now that it could have been one of these white orbs. It was very unusual for a shooting star to come down at 90-degree angle, perfectly angled. They usually have a different angle, and you see them further away in the atmosphere. And if they stop emitting light, it's because they disintegrate entering the atmosphere, or they hit the ground. But here it was very close, and it stopped about 100 meters or less from the ground. So it was very, very unusual light. But there's a whole range. There's a ton of videos that are very amazing to watch. I'm sure a lot of your audience would be aware of some of these videos.
You mentioned just time travel in passing. This is an interesting topic because I've chatted with quite a few people in the UFO space, and majority of them seem to drop in time travel into the conversation as well. So there seems to be some sort of link between the UFO community and supposedly these time travel projects. I'm guessing you're referring to the likes of Project Pegasus, like that kind of thing, or is there something else that you've come across in that?
Look, no, I was just saying it could be one of a whole range of phenomenon as well.
Right. Okay. Right.
So, you can't deny that. We know already that, if I send you on a spaceship to the center of our galaxy, and you reach that center safely and quickly, and we put you into orbit around that giant black hole that's called Sagittarius, which is a massive black hole at the center of our galaxy, time for you would slow down.
Right.
The gravitational pull of that black hole. Time, just like time is a little bit slower on Earth compared to the moon or space because of the gravity. So if you could then circle that black hole for 1 year of our time, probably 1 month of your time would have passed. So if you would come back quickly, then you would come as sort of younger, if you like, compared to your...
I do wonder how that works from an aging perspective, because your physical body, it will just continue to age whether you're away for a month or a year, right? Like if time had some absolute quality to it, your body would age relative to that, right? Not necessarily based on moon time or Earth time, I think. I don't know. How does that work? What do you know about that?
It's actually the time itself, space-time itself, that slows down. So it's not just the time, but the space as well. So everything would slow down. So for you, nothing would change. But in fact, if we were looking at you through our lenses, we would see that everything you would do, all your movements would be very, very slow. It's a bit like if you would fall into a black hole. So if you go past that event horizon, there would be a picture of you that's staying on the at that event horizon. There's a picture of you that would be frozen, and for us it would look like you're there frozen in time, but you would have been spaghettified by the black hole and dead a long time ago. So yeah, the concept of time is very interesting. Time is relative. That's what Einstein proved. So there's no one time, there's no one universal time. So there must be ways that you can sort of play with that. And if you add to that quantum physics, then yeah, there's a lot of scientific research that we still have to understand.
I wonder if it's also kind of like, back in the day, the phenomenon of, say, gravity was considered magic because it was unseen. People didn't really understand it. So, because it didn't really have an explanation for it, it would have been considered like magic for all intents and purposes, right? And then as you start to sort of understand a phenomenon, then it becomes less magical, more scientific. And I wonder if there's, that's kind of what's happening in the space at the moment, because there's a lot of stuff that sits in the esoteric end of the spectrum. And, people who do connect with these beings have very tangible connections. I've spoken with a lot of people who have countless photographs of these craft, can connect with them at will, so there is an element of consciousness to this, where it's not something that's completely out of the blue. There is a level of how would you say, like the ability to direct these connections I've seen, you know, with a lot of people as well. So, you know, for some people it might seem like, well, this is totally woo-woo, it's totally esoteric, we don't understand it, it's religious, it's spiritual. They put it into the I don't understand bucket, and this must not be real because it's not scientifically proven. And I guess part of my questioning has been around, well, is there a space to bridge that gap? Because you've got on one hand the people that are very, you know, scientifically minded, who are saying, well, we want to physically see this craft, we want to measure it with our instruments, and then we'll believe it's real. And then you have all the spiritual people that talk about, you know, the planetary ascension, and the people that are talking about the more esoteric side of the spectrum. And they're like, well, we've been connecting with these beings for years. I channel Pleiadians, I connect with these different entities. I see craft above my home all the time. They've got photographs. There's a lot of evidence in that regard, but it's all anecdotal. And so I wonder if there's a bridge between these realms where, you know, maybe it's just that the science hasn't quite understood what the spiritual people are going on about, and it just seems like pseudoscience, but maybe there's something more to it. What do you think about that?
Oh, look, sure. There's, as I said before, there's a lot of things that we don't understand. So there's a gap there, obviously, that then we try to fill with other type of, you know, version of our understanding, whether it's a religious, you know, lens, or whether it's other type of angles of looking at things. But certainly, scientifically speaking, there's a lot of things that we don't understand. So we have to be open to possibilities. You know, what's been happening, for example, at Skinwalker Ranch is very interesting. So, you know, there's a lot of, yes, you're right. There's a lot of people who talk about their positive experience with, you know, some sort of intelligent life form, whether it's spiritually or through meditation, or whether it's been actual sort of positive abductions. But there's also, through my research, the majority of people who've been abducted, it's not a positive experience. So there's, again, when we talk about contact with these things, I always remind that, yeah, there's different type of things that we're dealing with. And there's been different forms of contact. So what's happening in Skinwalker Ranch, for example, in Utah, is it's not something that's very positive. It's something that we've been trying to understand and measure for more than 25, 30 years. So first through NIDS, but then through a private owner now. And with
Could you just explain what's happening there?
You haven't heard of Skinwalker Ranch?
Is this the one with the cattle?
Yeah, there's cattle there. That's a ranch. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the mutilations, is that what you're talking about?
Oh, look, there's a multitude of events that have been.
Yeah, maybe just give us a little explanation as to what's happening.
Yeah, sure. Well, Skinwalker Ranch, we call it the highway of the paranormal. And so, again, the term paranormal is an interesting term, and relates to the fact that it's something that we don't understand. But at Skinwalker, for many, many decades before the last owners sold the ranch to the US government for military research, and millions of dollars have been thrown at Skinwalker, where we've seen portals, for example, portals opening with creatures crawling out of the portal. We've seen Bigfoot, we've seen UFOs, flying saucers, we've seen people have experienced all sorts of creatures and beings playing around, making noise, playing with you, poltergeist, noises at night, things that disappear in the house. So really, really creepy stuff. And that's something that we don't understand, but certainly it's something that's not friendly. So, and cattle mutilation and all sorts of stuff. And so there's a whole, again, there's been some good documentaries on Skinwalker Ranch. So that's an example of, you know, something that we don't understand, and we try to understand scientifically, but it's certainly not something that you want to tell everyone or shout to the public, because people will run to the hills. It's quite scary. And from a military perspective, you know, it's a national security issue, potentially, because it's, you know, potentially risking first our society to collapse, but also it's a risk to some of of our pilots, for example. We've lost pilots or even civilians. And there's also the phenomenon I'm very interested in people disappearances. So I'm not talking abductions because we just don't know, but it's all the work that's been conducted by David Paulides. I'm not sure if you know David Paulides. So former police officer, worked in the IT industry, and he's been researching very unusual disappearances of people usually in national parks in the US, North America, so USA, Canada. And I really invite everyone to look at his work. And his last documentary is sort of relating these disappearances to the UFO phenomenon. And again, there's hundreds of people missing for decades, if not century, very unusual disappearances of people that it's very hard to get answers from the authorities. So certainly here, something that's not positive as well in terms of contact with, one form of non-human life. Let's call it that way.
Are there theories around why that specific area might be so heavy in that paranormal activity?
So there's a clusters, a good question. David Paulides has identified various clusters of disappearances in North America. And these clusters are usually very close to water. That's what he found. So there's a link with water there. And they're usually quite isolated places. So they're often national parks.
Is there anything to do with like the magnetic fields, or for example, like the ranch? I mean, is there some sort of theory as to why a lot of stuff
I'm not
happens?
aware of that, no.
Okay. So that's quite interesting. And we, I mean, so here in Australia, particularly in Perth, we have some spots here that are actually very high in UFO activity. When people come and research, the activity here in Australia, they typically get quite surprised because West Australia, Perth in particular, in the Perth Hills, we just have so much activity going on there. I mean, you can just go out there any night of the night and the chances of seeing something are quite high. Whereas if you go to some other areas in Western Australia, you're not as likely to get as much activity. And it seems to be that there's certain spots around the planet. Like I know Hawaii has some places where there's a lot of activity. Of course, there's been a lot of hype recently in Montana in the US with the, supposed weather balloons. So there seems to be a lot of concentrated areas of activity in specific places. And then other areas you seem to not get much. And so, there are some people out there that say, well, it's because of ley lines, it's because of electromagnetic fields, it's because of, XYZ potential reasons. So I was just wondering if you have any ideas as to what might be causing that.
Yeah, look, again, I've been looking at that aspect of things as well. First of all, we don't really know if there's areas where there's more activities. I mean, there's UFO sightings everywhere around the world every day. So there's this activity, if you like, that is occurring pretty much everywhere on the planet. And there's some places where there may be more people to report it, and others where there are less people to report it. And there may be some areas where culturally there's a structure there's a platform to report it, and other parts of the world where there's nothing to report it, or it may be seen as not good to report it. So I'm not sure if there's, but certainly Skinwalker is certainly, in terms of paranormal activities, is what we call it the highway. That's for sure. In terms of physical UFOs, crafts, it seems to me that there's sightings, across all continents. But again, often it's very close to water, or we've seen also crafts coming out of volcanoes. So you're referring to Hawaii. I think that volcano was in the US, but certainly another part of my research has been around potentially underground UFO bases, but also what military applications can do with building bases underwater.
What do you know about underwater or underground bases?
Well, again, through very interesting books, it's been quite interesting to read that, in fact, even ourselves, humans, can achieve amazing technological prowess by building underground. So there's a lot of secret installations on the ground around the world. One is Pine Gap in Australia. I'm sure you know that. But we can actually build on the ground very, 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 very deep and very, very big. So that's for the humans. And that's sort of often it's sort of not classified into the sort of it's black budgets, if you like. So it's money, trillions of dollars missing from the economy, or money that's used for black budgets. And so these things cost trillions of dollars, but they're not approved by Congress or your traditional.
Who builds them? Who authorizes these projects? I mean, someone somewhere surely is getting in trouble for this, unless all the governments are in on it.
Look, military organizations around the world have had underground bases, for a very long time. Some of them are well known, and some of them are not known. So, obviously, it's a defense apparatus, defense contractors. It's a whole range of companies, agencies that achieve these things. But yeah, so I guess the point is that there's a lot of underground facilities, and yeah, people would be surprised what we can actually do.
When you say a lot, I mean, what are we talking here? I mean, most people know about Pine Gap and Area 51.
No, you're talking hundreds across the US, North Europe, continental Europe, but also China and Russia.
Who builds them? What do they do there?
Like I said, it's like I said, it's for military purposes.
Okay. And so if somebody wanted to just go out and find one of these places, could you just go and find one?
I don't think I think you would be arrested if you get too close to one of these areas.
Right. But they'd be pretty remote, right? Like you wouldn't just stumble upon it without potentially going pretty far out.
No, I don't think you would be able to access any of these facilities without the right to do so, or proper invitation.
Right. What do they do at these sites?
Oh, look, it's again, it's military applications. So I'll let you imagine. But it's, there's
could be anything.
Yeah, that's right. Could be anything.
And do you think some of these are related to, like UFO?
Of course.
Activities? Because, there are people that say that, that they house craft at some of these. So obviously Area 51, people know about, supposedly there's a craft there with some bodies and, the remnants of Roswell and things like that. Pine Gap is quite well known as well for being one of those sorts of military sites. Are there any others that you know of, here in Australia or in the US that you can specifically point out?
I'll just grab the book for you.
Okay.
So Richard Saunders, I invite
everyone
to. Do you know Richard?
That literally just popped up for me this morning. I was just having a look at that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Hidden Plain Sight, which was published by Richard Dolan Publishing House, and that book lists it talks about 50 installations,
right,
all across the US, California, New Mexico, Massachusetts, in Norway, National Forest in California, Gulf of Mexico. Yeah, it's all there. Michigan, Missouri. So it's a really great book that encourage anyone who is interested in that to read, because yes, there's a clear connection between human, military, or private underground facilities and the UFO phenomenon.
So just one last question. I know you have to head off soon. So a lot of the craft do get seen around military areas, right? And there are reports of them supposedly deactivating or like removing missiles from the air, or turning on and off things. And so there is, a national security threat. Well, I personally don't believe it's a threat. I think these beings are telling us very clearly to stop nuking ourselves. I think it's quite clear what the message is. But what are your thoughts on that interaction between the military equipment and these extraterrestrial beings or craft?
Sure. Again, before I answer that question, I want to remind that I think that there's a multitude of type of intelligent non-human life that we're dealing with here. It's not just one that is looking at our specifically nuclear installations. But certainly with the work of Robert Hastings and other researchers, it seems that even to this day, pretty much every single nuclear installations in the world, whether they're nuclear power plants for electricity generation or whether they are for military purposes, have and are being monitored by various type of crafts. And some of them have, like you said, suggested, disarmed, messed up with the computing systems of these ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles, or have been able to activate them. So clearly, if you have something or someone that can activate a nuclear weapon, that's something that's a very serious concern for the military. So I share that concern. But also to note that, so a question around alien agenda, again, that's a question that some great researchers like Richard Don have been trying to answer. And to think that the aliens are here to save us is nice, but I don't think it's a realistic scenario here. And I would be more to think that there's a multitude of intelligent life forms with a multitude of agendas, and some of them are definitely interested in our nuclear installations. And that's certainly a concern for military authorities because that shows that there's weaknesses in their defense systems, and we just don't know what these things could do. You have no control, so it's a problem. For a technology that we barely control ourselves. We've had many accidents, nuclear accidents, where there were very devastating impacts, and no one else, no one there to save us. To think that aliens are here to save us from climate change. Well, climate change is here now. We've passed some really bad thresholds. It's biodiversity loss around the planet, etc. So there's nuclear there. I mean, war is at the doorstep, is in Europe right now. So to think that that some of these things are benevolent is nice. I'm sure there are benevolent entities out there. I believe myself in that there's probably some of these beings are benevolent, but there's a whole range of other intelligent life forms that are looking at us just like we're looking at monkeys playing with a matchbox. Are you going to save the monkey? No. But if the matchbox is going to set the whole building in fire, then you probably take the matchbox away from the monkey, right? But you're not going to share all your technologies with that monkey. You can barely play with the matchbox, and that's sort of the illusion with the nuclear, technology and humans. And we just don't know what the impact of nuclear fission does, not fusion, but fission. So nuclear weapons. When we detonate a bomb that powerful, what does it do to the quantum world, for example? Maybe it has impacts, not just in our physical reality, in the desert or on the water where we blow that bomb, but also in across other dimensions. Who knows? So I think a question that often people ask me is, why would some alien life form come and visit us? Why? Well, why not? There's so much that we've developed in the last 200 years. It's quite incredible. So
you've certainly given us a lot to think about. So thank you so much for sharing. It seems like you've really taken the time to do a lot of research, read a lot of books, and really figure out what's going on in the space. So Yeah, really appreciate you joining us here today, Julien. I'm
Pleasure.
sure for anyone who is listening, you've given them a lot of other leads to go off, a lot of other things to go and research, and I guess that's what this is all about at the moment. You know, it's about opening conversation,
Exactly.
speaking different perspectives. I guess one final question, you know, that's probably on everybody's mind. Do you think disclosure is happening anytime soon?
Well, again, it's an interesting question. I think disclosure has been happening since the beginning, since let's say World War II. But it's a drip by drip disclosure. I think it's going to take three centuries. I don't think we will have access to the whole truth anytime soon. I think there's a red line of disclosure. I think if some agencies or the president of the United States decides to say that, yes, there's been abductions, people have been abducted and disappeared, and yes, there's been crash retrievals, I think it would open a can of worms that it's just not. It's a national security issue. Are we going to have a bit more discussions on that topic in the public space? Yes, definitely. I think that's why I'm here for, to have that conversation with the public and other researchers, and to sort of discuss the idea. But disclosure has been happening. It's happening now, but it's happening very slowly. It's going to take generations, just because there's power at play. There's different interests. It's not that simple. Even amongst humans and amongst organizations, there's different powers at play. There's different agendas. Everyone wants a piece of the cake. There's technological issues as well. There's legal issues. So it's I don't think that we're going to know everything anytime soon. But I think the ball is, has been rolling for 80 years. It's definitely in our culture now, in our sort of Hollywood pop culture, the flying saucers, the aliens, you see them on cartoons for kids. So, things are moving really slowly. And sometimes you've got a leak, you've got a declassified, you've got someone speaking out, you've got a deathbed confession. But generally speaking, it's really slow because military organizations are trying to understand what's going on. And I think that they've got so much to deal with, and they're very scared of sharing that secret. And they want to make sure that if they do share that secret, then, everything is under control. So I think disclosure is happening, but really slowly. And there's a lot of disinformation there as well. There's a lot of misinformation. We didn't talk about the spying balloons, but that's what we call the balloon gate, if you like. And there's a lot we could talk about maybe next time. But the fact that, we talk about, we sort of mix up UFOs and balloons, bring us back straight back to Roswell, really, where you ridicule the subject, and people have a very short attention to the UFO phenomenon. They will look at their Fox News and see, oh yeah, UFOs are just balloons. It's all fine. There's nothing to the UFO phenomenon. So again, that's happening right now. That spin still continues to this day. And NASA still continues to this day to lie to the public about life in the universe, because they've got tons of classified documents. So disclosure, probably not. A discussion, yes. I hope so.
One of the things that I always say is that we are the disclosure. I'm not waiting on the government. I don't think they're going to do it anytime soon, but I think we certainly as the public can take things into our own hands and ask the questions and do our due diligence as well. So Julien, again, thank you so much for being here with us. Absolute pleasure to have you. Hopefully we will speak with you again. It seems like you have a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. So for anyone who wants to find you, where can they go?
Just visit my website, ufoparadigm.com.
Amazing. Beautiful. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, Isha.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to First Contact. I'm your host Isha Patel, and I'm so excited to have this conversation about open contact with extraterrestrial beings. Come join me in the Facebook community where you can continue the discussion, or keep listening for another episode of First Contact.